Good morning. So I'd like to start off right away by just diving into some examples of the kind of thing that I've been looking at, and over the last few years, really, trying to make sense of what is going on with things and what they mean to and for us in our everyday lives and society, and how we can think about that in relation to design. So it's become one of my favorite examples is this pair of headphones that I got in a moment of weakness at an airport electronics store, but it's turned out to be a really interesting case. So getting used to having headphones that also have an app, and they also have software updates. And I saw in this one, which is in this extremely tiny box, so you have to scroll through this text to actually read it. But I noticed in this one that it said that the update functionality, or this update may change, add, or remove functionality. I thought, okay, that's sort of interesting. I might like to know if that's going to happen. So I started to dig a little bit deeper into EULAs, become one of my favorite things in trying to figure out what's going on with things. And they sort of doubled down on this, saying in part that they may even remove functions you may rely upon, just sort of to rub it in a little bit more, it feels like. So I wondered, okay, what if I don't like this? So continuing to dig, I found, so if I want to object, I can do it within 30 days by sending 2 letters to Tokyo. But this is only to opt out of dispute resolution, so the binding arbitration. The EULA still completely applies, and I must completely accept that in order to use my not entirely cheap headphones. Also, another interesting thing, speaking of changes, it's added the Google and Amazon Alexa functionality. And I can now even change the function of this physical button, which is originally for noise canceling, but now even that sort of functionality can change. Another thing, getting used to having connected speakers with an app. And I noticed here in the settings that there's also separate settings for Google Chromecast, so hey Google again. And the built-in privacy just leads to Google's overall privacy policy. So interesting connections there already just through using my speakers. I also think Netflix is a terrific, actually a quite literal example of a relational ontology, because it doesn't exist as a thing for us, as a thing for use, without being called into existence in relation to a particular user profile. So you have to say who's watching, and then Netflix will show up. It will appear as a thing for you. But Netflix is never the same thing. It's not the same for me, different times when I log in. It's not the same between me and other people, because everything is a recommendation. So it's not like you can tell someone, hey, you should watch this show on Netflix. I don't remember the name, but it was about the second row down, third to the right. We can't do that with Netflix because it's never the same thing. And in fact, based on conversations I've had with people, it seems like really the only shared experience with Netflix is one of ruined Friday nights of scrolling through what seems to be a strangely limited selection. As the pizza gets cold and the beer gets warm and you start to sort of long for a trip to the video rental store. Or at least that's what my Friday nights look like now. And then also Spotify is another example we've worked with quite a bit, including in the book. So it's a music playing thing that offers playlists for just about every mood and occasion. And I was just going to grab a screenshot. I thought this one for needing a confidence boost was quite interesting. And it also reminded me of something that Facebook tried a while back, where they figured out how to target moments when young people need a confidence boost by monitoring posts, pictures, and interactions, figuring out when they feel worthless, overwhelmed, and nervous, and then, of course, sharing that with advertisers who can target them in those moments. But back to Spotify. They're also quite proud of how well they know their users and can effectively target them on behalf of advertisers. So this is on the brand-facing page, which is just a gift that keeps on giving. I think I've used this in all of my presentations for the last couple of years. But they say that we know our fans, like really know them. So the time you skipped Britney to hear the Beatles, time you played Young, Dumb, and Broke 117 times in a row, the time you made a road trip playlist with your friends. Every swipe, search, skip, and shuffle tells us a story about our audience. So in other words, interaction mechanisms have become storytellers, according to them. And they're telling stories about us as we use them. So these examples are things that my colleague Johan Rydström and I have called fluid assemblages. And this is something, as Skenna mentioned, we wrote about in our book that came out earlier this year. And we're continuing to work on these ideas in our current project on design philosophy for things that change, along with Sabrina Hauser, who I think is probably somewhere here. So just very briefly, so by fluid assemblages, we're referring to the fact that things are now often constantly changing. They're changing with software updates in relation to different contexts, users, all types of different conditions. And they're also composed of a variety of physical and digital resources. And just in case there are any philosophers in the room, I want to say that an assemblage is fluid is technically superfluous. So we mean only to emphasize that this is a kind of fluidity that we're seeing in things that seems to be of a different magnitude than what we've been used to in previous kinds of things, and that we need to figure out how to deal with in everyday life and especially in design. And one of the key overarching aspects of fluid assemblages is that they entail dynamic and constitutive relations between the local and the global. A thing that is made available as a thing for use, so for example, an app on a smartphone, a digital assistant, wearable health and fitness tracker, a web service, and so on, is actually made as a thing in non-trivial ways at runtime, on the basis of both global settings, so for example, the software version, the current state of machine learning algorithms, and so on, and local customization. So a specific user account, location, history, time of day, mood, needing a confidence boost, preferences, and so on. And of course, these things are also driven by new business logics. So just to hit some high points very briefly. These things have become key sites for the production of data about people's everyday activities, and they are designed to maximize this production in many cases. Everyday activities are carried out and filtered through the algorithmic logic of these things and the platforms on which they operate that are geared toward instrumentation, optimized for prediction and control. So the basic mechanisms of surveillance capitalism. And this behavioral data is the primary resource that is processed and metabolized within surveillance and platform capitalism, generating value, of course, mainly for corporate actors in many cases. So I also wonder, in this context, why do connected things, especially those designed by Google and Amazon and so on, often seem like they're trying to disappear, or to at least be really well camouflaged, as I think this Google Home does. I unfortunately couldn't find any images, but when I was in Tokyo a couple years ago, there was this print ad campaign for Google Home that was a lot of places, in the metro and so on. And it seemed like it really was based on this idea of camouflage. It was showing Google Homes basically like blending into various domestic settings, which I thought was a very interesting approach. Also in this really fantastic, for many reasons, promotional video for Google product design, the VP of the product design says that technology will eventually be invisible. So I was trying to find especially this moment, and it was even better than I had remembered because it shows Google Home with a smudge stick and a crystal. And I feel like there's so much to unpack here. As I said on Twitter, I don't know if this is to indicate that the Google Home is safe, you don't need to worry, or that maybe you need some other kinds of technologies to kind of purify the evil surveillance energies or so on. But we can talk about that over coffee. In another video on Google Nest Smart Displays and Google Assistant, the designers of these products here describe their approach to things that are meant to live in the home, to be with us in our everyday lives. So they say that the goal is almost to get people to stop using them as fast as possible, because the thing that's happening in their life is more important. that we don't have a lot of back buttons. You don't have to open up and really navigate to a lot of places. You just keep going forward. And then after you're done with an activity, the screen just goes away. The screen, mind you, not everything. And then, of course, transparency and privacy are also key issues. So here's another designer talking about this. And he says that to address this, we make sure that the device is always showing what's actually happening, which seems like a really good idea. And I've been thinking a lot about how to do this. So he says the way they do that is by having an LED. It's an LED that shows if the camera is on or off. And I think a little toggle button where you can set that. And so he says you do this to make sure that the user feels confident, like, oh, I have control over this, because you can tell if the camera's on or off. And then wrapping up this video, a designer concludes saying that, and this is the start of a paradigm shift, that devices and ambient computing are just going to continue to grow, and as people get more comfortable with them, it's really all about reducing friction. Not tethering you to devices, just letting you live your life, be with your family, get to your job, or whatever it is, just life. So I notice what seems to be an interesting narrative here. It's a narrative that technology will disappear as things become embedded in everyday life. It will just go away. So nothing else to worry about, technology will just disappear. But I'd like to propose a counter-narrative, and this is coming out of the work that we've been doing around these kinds of things and how we live with them and can design them better. And what I'd like to propose is that things are about relations. And relations are not something that can disappear. Relations need to be constantly negotiated and renegotiated over time as contexts and entities change. So here I want to offer just a couple of concepts that came out of our work so far in fluid assemblages and that we've been working with to try to figure out what's actually going on with these kinds of things. So I won't go into detail, but just sort of to toss these out, and hopefully the connections will be clear to some of the examples. So one is multi-instability. So it's riffing on a concept of multi-stability, that humans can choose how we want to relate to things. Things can be multiple things to us as we choose how to use them. But the thing with fluid assemblages is that they're also relating actively to us. So they're figuring out if we need a confidence boost. They're figuring out how to present themselves based on who, where we are, and a variety of different factors. So it's not just us choosing how we come to technology, it's also technology trying to be smart, configuring itself, changing in relation to us. Another is multi-intentionality, again, riffing on a concept of intentionality from philosophy. And this refers to the fact that there are multiple relations within and across assemblages among actors with sometimes quite different intentionalities and intentions. So this is me using Spotify, but also Spotify figuring out what I'm doing in order to allow advertisers to address me in particular moments. This might also include what's been called the ghost work of the human labor that's required to make smart systems smart in many cases. So there's a variety of different actors within and across fluid assemblages that have different interests, different relations to and through these kinds of things. And also in many cases, interfaces actually conceal what's going on with things. So this comes also from history, that as computational technology became more complex, an approach to interface design was to hide as much of that complexity as possible, or to hide what was not needed, to just make something available as a thing for use. So this is where we get human-computer interaction and approaches to trying to make something of a complex machine available for people to use. Not necessarily understanding exactly how it worked, just being able to use it. And so this has led now to a situation where we have interfaces that are concealing rather than revealing what something actually is and does. Except now it's not only that it's a really complex machine that we can't quite follow, it's also different types of economic interests, surveillance capitalism, et cetera. So there's actually a number of relations involved. And these are relations, again, that need to be managed, negotiated, renegotiated over time. So the question is, how could these actually be acknowledged and facilitated through design? What types of alternatives might we have in designing for relations instead of technology to disappear into everyday life? So this is something I've been exploring together with interaction design MFA students in a short 10-week course at Umeå Institute of Design that was focused on this idea of fluid assemblages. And this just wrapped up last week, so I'm not going to be able to share with you a few very fresh student projects over this, again, very short course, but I think some interesting ideas. And again, trying to explore alternatives. So not just to critique, which of course we need to do as a first step, but what we need, I think, even more is to propose alternatives, to say things could be different. So these are also, at least a few of them now up on the Medium site, designing fluid assemblages, so you can see some of them there, and hopefully more will be posted soon as well. So some alternatives, and here I'm pulling out a few themes that I see in some of their projects. So one is to design friction to support reflection. So instead of designing friction away, to actually design it in, to help people to manage their attention in ways that align with their own intentions. So this is something that Maja and Selvi explored, asking what would happen when we add reflection to video consumption. So seeing that streaming audio and video are some of the biggest drivers of data growth, and they found out that video consumption accounts for 80% of the entire internet's carbon emission levels. So they designed these little dials for time, sound, and image, where you can sort of negotiate with yourself what kind of image quality or sound quality you need for a particular session. So you can see, what's your emission going to be, and sort of be able to tune that to reflect your experience or your intentions. Another approach is to optimize for different parameters. So this is something that Ilse explored on trying to redefine the business model of the internet.
The current internet business model is set up so companies design their services to keep you hooked. They optimize to make you click ads so that they earn more money. What if we break this model? Imagine, you get up in the morning and begin your daily routine. You make your breakfast and go online as usual. But now, you start with watching some ads. After this, you support a new feature that a company wants to bring to the web. You can go through the options and look at what they have to offer you. You decide to support a company that is building a secure social media platform. Now you can surf the internet as usual, except for the rest of the day it will be ad-free.
So a provocation, but I think an interesting model for how internet might be different if we can try to change sort of the way that the incentives are set up. Another example was from Shib, who designed a shopping cart to look at things not just like popularity and price, but also like well-being, sustainability, trustworthiness, surveillance, and so on. Another alternative is to bring other kinds of entities into relation. This is something that Lukas explored, looking particularly at power generation on the Umeå River. So he designed the smart assistant to be an advocate for this river and the natural ecosystem. So the human usage of electricity is not really in sync with the river's natural flow. So it's best for the ecosystem of the river if it's a continuous flow, a continuous power generation. Humans tend to have a different cycle or different schedule. So he designed this thing that would be a quite forceful advocate for the river in determining when you're able to use power and not. So there's this thing where you have wheels. One represents the flow of the river, the other your own power generation. The idea is to get them spinning more or less in sync. So it's sort of, you hear a nice sort of whirring sound if it gets really fast. Another was this proposal by Carolyn to use symbolic and ritualistic actions to help people prioritize water use, to reestablish the resource's value in everyday life, and express the energy expended to transport the water from the source to the human. So working with sort of water monitoring, but in a more kind of embodied way. Another alternative, to facilitate negotiation with and within networks. How do we tune what these things are and what they're doing? And so here a proposal from Minh about the future of advertising and what that means for our experience in public spaces. And another alternative would be to craft capacities for control. So not just for corporations, but also for us as users. So Geert explored different futures for social networks based on a speculative future where companies like Facebook will be forced to open up and allow others to enter into the market. And one of his speculations was for a privacy gradient, which is a mechanism for setting how much one wants to share or not in a particular moment. And CAMRO is a private lens field, looking at a future or even a current reality where a lot of things are requesting access to a camera. So this is one that has a nice sort of physical gesture and light system where we'll actually turn away from you. You're able to, through a gesture, instruct it to turn away from you. So you can tell that both you and anyone else in the space that you're then in a private space. Another alternative, to find opportunities in actually respecting privacy. So this is something that Leia explored, looking at something like a personal assistant, but also working with really sort of sensitive and intimate data, like recognizing emotions, and then seeing how might it be possible to work with that. Assuming none of the big privacy-invading corporations are involved, what would it actually be like to have a thing, really trying to understand what your experience is like and to try to help you through your day? It might be extremely annoying, but it's a different kind of space to explore if you look at what might be possible with these types of things. And another alternative is to introduce democratic mechanisms. This is something that Connie explored in relation to a system like Facebook. What would it be like to introduce democratic governance to a platform like this? So envisioning, just like with nations, electing your representatives or some type of governance system in Facebook. So you might see posts from particular candidates, And it would also show you how much you're being influenced by different candidates. So here you can see, you're seeing a lot from this guy, but you haven't actually seen very much from these other people. So through looking at these other candidates as well, you could then get to this situation where you understand that you've actually sort of seen all of the options, and then you're able to place your vote. Toby speculated about a democratic intervention against digital colonialism in the UK. This was based on 3 pillars of reforming surveillance capitalism, centralizing control of tech platforms, so all data would go through some sort of centralized system, and democratizing tech policy making through an open policy hub. It's a provocation, but trying to look at what it might be like if we were to set up this type of governance mechanism. And then just wrapping up and to conclude, I want to offer some brief reflections on the potential of design as an approach to intentional change. So again, not only critiquing, but actually proposing and materializing alternatives. So design at large is a basic approach to the world and activity, is a practice of making and remaking the artificial. It's turning existing situations into preferred ones, to use a sort of classic line, and bringing about intentional change. And I think we probably all agree that we need some of that now in relation to these kinds of things. So in other words, taking a design approach means looking at the world and saying, we could do better than this, that there could be a better way, and we could bring that better way into existence. So things can always be otherwise. And the artificial, by definition, can always be otherwise. And we can work to bring these possibilities into existence. So yes, there's currently huge and entrenched challenges, but there's always these possibilities. And design is a way of envisioning and bringing into being these alternatives. So I think it's a vital practice of hope. And it's one I look forward to practicing here together with you over the next couple of days. Thank you.